Our final speaker is William Stubbs. William is an award-winning social entrepreneur, writer, speaker, and consultant. The son of a software entrepreneur and an artist, William was influenced early on by the power of technology and creativity to change people and the world. Experience of childhood depression led William to be fascinated by social change and public health, and in 2011 he co-founded the acclaimed mental health not-for-profit Spur Projects, now known for its cutting-edge mental health campaigns, including Soften the Fuck Up. I can remember that. Old Mate and world's first global mental health data project, How is the World Feeling? In 2016, he was recognized by the Queensland Mental Health Commission with the Judge Berjager Peer Experience Award for his work in progressing mental health in the public space. He also has been named as one of Australia's top young social entrepreneurs, nominated for the Australian Mental Health Prize, and a semi-finalist for the Queensland Young Achievers Award. William is a proud Telstra Foundation Ambassador, World Economics Forum Global Shaper, mentor to Indigenous Business Accelerator. He's also once won a push-up bet on the floor of a bar in Macau. Well done. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome William.
That was an intro. I have the dubious honour to talk to you shortly before lunch, as everybody is thinking about food and following esteemed researchers and AFL players. So I'll do my best to make this at least interesting and a little bit exciting. So my name is Will Stubbs. I am a co-founder of Spur Projects. We have been around since 2011, and we are a completely, or at least primarily, unfunded organisation, a grassroots movement, and in many ways an experimentation lab. Whenever I start one of these talks, I do explain the reason that we exist, but for many of you, I think that this isn't anything shocking or anything newsworthy. And it's that by the end of today, there will be 6 Australian men that will have considered it an easier option to kill themselves than to seek help. And that will happen again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, until by the end of the year, there will be thousands of Australian men dead to suicide. Globally, that accounts for 700,000 people, which actually is more than war. They're represented here by a red pixel across the screen. To make that even worse, every suicide that does occur, there are 30 attempts that go along with that. Every suicide has about 100 people that are impacted by that event. When we talk about suicide, we shouldn't forget those that are still suffering or those that are mourning a loss. This was news to me back in 2011 when we started. And if, like yourself, if you're hearing this news or these facts and you're thinking that it is heartbreaking, outrageous, or in some ways ridiculous, then you're not alone. And that's why we started Spur Projects. Spur Projects, honestly, I didn't think that I'd be still doing this 6 years later, but here I am. And it has been one of the most rewarding things I've done in my entire life. I have a day job. This is a passion project amongst myself and my co-founders. And it has a stated explicit goal, which I admit is quite ambitious, but it is to eliminate male suicide in Australia. Every project that we do is based on that goal, but with a methodology I'll explain in a moment. And the reason I'm talking today is that every one of our projects has an element of digital running through it. We look at projects that are innovative, that use technology and creativity to effect social change. That includes that when we started, we looked at pamphlets and brochures around depression, and they all seemed to be somewhat similar. They were black and white. They had somebody sitting on the edge of the bed with their head in their hands and the big word depression running across it. And I remember thinking when I was 12 and I was really sick and I ended up being quite depressed and I was suicidal and one day almost did take my life. Was that the sort of thing that I felt I would have wanted to have read? And the answer was no. So everything that we do has to be bold. And if we see a campaign or a project out there that's already working well, we do the opposite. We go in the other direction and look for something different. How we approach our campaigns is based on this methodology. Every campaign we do is about prevention. In many ways, we're actually trying to make a lot of intervention services redundant, if that's going to be possible. We look at social change very, very early on. We don't want to deal with somebody when they've gone down a scale of tough times and depression and have that crisis point. That's Lifeline. That's a connector in Mates in Construction. We're way up here. When they're starting to have a tough time, when they've perhaps lost a relationship, they've lost a job, they're going through some medical issue, we want to make it okay for a man in Australia to say, you know what, I'm actually having a really tough time. Can we have a chat? Our second issue is language. We are quite conscious that language is one of the most powerful tools at our disposal. All of our campaigns are considered carefully in terms of what language we're using, and sometimes we do use F-bombs, but I'm told this is a great company to use that for. And we understand that language can shape ideas. And so whenever we create a campaign, we look at it from various angles to what message we're actually sending. We're also tricky buggers. So when it comes to a project, often our campaigns are very subversive. People would take part in the campaign or the project, the activity, the event, without even realizing they're doing it for their mental health. We're very, very good at being sneaky. We also ensure that every project that we're doing has an embedded action. Initially, our awareness campaigns were primarily about sending that message and raising awareness. As we progressed, that action has become more and more a frontline issue for us in our projects. This can be anything from sending a video to somebody you think is going through a tough time. It could be signing up to take a pledge. It could be logging an emotion in an app. We also understand that everybody needs a different message. Our campaigns are not designed generally for the whole. We approach things differently for different demographics and different groups. And finally, it's about community. And as Alison quite eloquently pointed out in a much better way than I can, social connectedness is incredibly important when it comes to combating mental illness. So these are some of our campaigns over the last 6 years, and one of the reasons that I have gone increasingly greyer since we started. This includes, as Godfrey mentioned, our initial campaign, Soften the Fuck Up, which I love saying to crowds of people and getting away with it. Fuck Up Night, which is an in-person event, but that's a framework available online, so anybody can host those events around the world with all the information they need. We've had those hosted around Australia and as far away as Germany, Brazil, and Uganda. There's our only fundraising campaign, Get Silent, Get Heard, which is essentially a rip-off of 48 Hour Famine, but instead people are sponsored to not talk for 48 hours to educate how hard it is not to speak up. Soften the Fuck Up, as an example of one of our very first campaigns, was something that was in response to the message of toughen the fuck up, harden the fuck up, be a man and just deal with it. We wanted to reshape the culture and make it acceptable. And in fact, part of the definition of a man that he has a softness to him, that if he is going through a tough time, he can put his hand up and ask for help. There was a series of online videos and Facebook account. We have followers now about 9,000 on Facebook. I was one of the faces on that campaign, and reflecting on it, having my face on an online campaign that went around the world talking about depression was absolutely terrifying. Yet now I can stand in front of a room full of strangers and tell you about it, and I've acclimatized myself to that sort of language. Soften the Fuck Up continues. We are looking at a project at the moment, partnering with some tradieware to sponsor this campaign and progress that message. As we went along, though, we looked at different ways to engage different demographics and different techniques beyond simply awareness. Old Mate is a project that's launching this year, and it's in response to, we'd always focus on the 14 to 44. And then when we looked at the statistics for ourselves, when we realized that, well, actually the suicide, if you remove natural causes, suicide is still an issue above 44, and in fact after 80 it spikes. One of the reasons for that is lack of connection, lack of privilege, lack of health, and lack of anybody really to hang out with. There was a recent story about that gentleman in North Queensland who just wanted a fishing buddy. And that's a perfect example of what Old Mate is about. This year, we'll be asking, when we launch, for 100,000 Australians to pledge to spend 1 hour of their time a month for a year with an old mate in their life. This will provide a series of activities that they can complete. We'll be partnering with organisations like movie cinemas, restaurants chains, to provide discounts and offerings on those activities. I have a 95-year-old granddad, and I know I need to spend more time with him. And this, for me, is a reminder that he lives on the Gold Coast, away from family. And even in hearing talking about connectivity recently, it makes me think, well, what is he going through on a day-to-day basis? We want to change that, so it's not something that you're like, you know what, I should actually call Granddad, but Granddad is my old mate. In 2014, we took a very different approach and we launched an app through, I actually don't even know how we accomplished this, frankly, with no funding, called How is Australia Feeling? And this is based on the concept that awareness campaigns were great, but there's lots of those out there. What could we do differently that nobody else could do? So we took something of a startup approach to this issue. And we wondered, what if we could take a mental health survey of the entire country in real time and find out how everybody was feeling, include their location, the time that they logged that emotion, their profession, age, gender identity, sexual identity, and compile that information into an online database. And we did. We had 3,500 odd people complete the survey over the course of a week. They logged their emotions 6 times a day, and that is now available online. And then we thought, wait, we can do better than that. So last year in October, during Mental Health Week, we launched How is the World Feeling? And again, we're very, very good at getting things for free. So we convinced the developer to help us build this app. And this was launched with, by the end of the week, 11,000 people across 105 countries with 9 different languages. This app included the feature that if a participant logged what we would consider a negative emotion, bearing in mind that no emotion is negative, but if they suggested that they were anxious, that they were particularly sad, or very angry repeatedly, or to a high level of intensity, that app would connect them with an emergency service in their area. We localized that for all states and provinces in the world the app was deployed. I actually discovered a number of countries I'd never heard of when we look at the data from this. This meant that we had a whole bunch of data. One of our co-founders is a researcher at Cambridge University, Brett Schultz, and he went gaga over what we could produce for him. It would reveal things like the most anxious profession in Australia, and well, demographic is male lawyers between the ages of 25 and 30, which probably is no surprise. And we could look at things like, how do men and women compare? So this is women's responses to the intensity of emotion. And there's the old adage that women feel emotions stronger, and men are just a little bit dull to it. We then compared men's responses to it. It was remarkably similar. You could argue, and I would argue, that this isn't a scientific study, it's an indicative study. You could also argue that the participants that were undertaking this survey were already aware of emotional intelligence and mental health issues, and that's definitely a factor. We point to this as a survey that went across the world at the same time as something that we should be considering. Again, women's emotions in terms of the types of emotions they logged, and men's. Wasn't that different. We then looked at the range of emotions over the course of the day. You might assume that men pretty much stay the same. Women, you're crazy, and you go up and down all the time. It was basically the same. And we wondered why that was. I am running out of time, but I'll point to a few construction industry insights that we found, which was that while at work, construction workers were about 50% less angry than general population, but once they left work, they became more angry, which is interesting. They reported slightly less happiness at work than the population and less sense of power, yet their feelings of power rose once they left work. From what I've been told about the construction industry, maybe it's a bad supervisor, I don't know. They reported about 50% less anxiety at work than the rest of the population. That I found quite surprising, given what I know about the construction industry and how tumultuous it is and how go it can be. What was interesting about that is that when they were asked when they signed up what was the most common emotion that they felt, and they ranked those, not one construction worker said anxiety was something they experienced. So there's something going on there. Clearly that they do identify that they feel anxiety, but they weren't willing to actually state that's something that I do experience. We have further insights to this, and I am really conscious of time, and I do go on tangents. So if you do email us at mail@spareprojects.org, we can provide you a free fact sheet with construction data from that project. And once again, all of the data from that effort is available online at howisthewellfeeling.org. That is free. It's going to be an annual project that anybody can access that data, bearing in mind that the individuals themselves are anonymous. So you won't be able to see my emotions, Godfrey's emotions, but you can look at trends and data and population, locations, etc. And this leaves me with a couple of things in terms of learnings. As I said, we've been doing this for 6 years, and I honestly didn't think that I'd be still doing this. I work as a consultant to pay the bills, but this is my passion. And I found that making a change in people's lives is much like a drug. It's addictive, and I don't ever want to stop doing this. But I've learnt a lot over the past 6 years. And there's a few things that I wanted to share with you. which is that mental health exists across the spectrum. When we're talking about mental health, mental illness, it's not that you are depressed or you're fine. You are any number of those combinations. You could be going through a tough time but generally okay, or you could be clinically depressed and needing to talk to somebody straight away. We need to look at the shades of grey in that rather than purely black and white. The other thing is that we can influence mental health, and this was something that it kind of took me a while to wrap my head around, which is that suicide is a behaviour. Depression is a disease. Suicide is an action that you take, whereas cancer and depression are quite similar. I consider myself in remission from depression. I might never have it ever again in my life. But the act of wanting to kill yourself is a behaviour, and by that very nature, we can actually prevent that. We can change that. It isn't destined, it isn't fate. We can actually prevent suicide from happening, and one day eliminate it completely, in my belief. The other thing is that men are emotionally complex, and as I explained, we 100% believe in all of our campaigns that men do have emotions, that we have a whole range of emotions, a whole complexity of emotions. How we express that, how we feel that might just be different to women. There's a great quote, if anybody's a Shakespeare kind of buff, I'm not, I just saw the movie, of Macbeth. And after Macbeth has Macduff's family murdered, Malcolm says to him, Macduff, you must avenge this like a man. And Macduff says, indeed so, but first I must feel it like a man. And that was written hundreds of years ago. Now, Dr. Paul, as soon as I saw alexithymia in your presentation, I knew you'd be sitting right in front of me when I got to this slide. I think we should have some beers. I think we'd have a lot of fun talking to each other. Our approach to alexithymia, and just to recap that, alexithymia essentially means a condition of the mind. Alex meaning without lexicon. You don't have the language to express how you feel. There's clinical normative alexithymia, which is that your brain does not have the biological component in order to express how you feel. And there's normative alexithymia, in the sense that you are conditioned through society, education, or upbringing to not express how you feel. Our approach to this is that men are equipped to express their emotions. We just don't allow them to. And if you have a boy that's brought up and constantly reinforced to not share your emotions, not talk, he's never going to learn those abilities. And in fact, his brain might never actually develop that capability. But they can. And we have to understand that men do share emotions. We just do it in our own way. So when it comes to talking to men, we avoid a lot of these words and phrases. We also avoid tailoring things all too much to be almost patronizing. My favorite one of these are all products that have been targeted specifically through marketing to men. My favorite one is Dude Wipes, which is essentially wet ones, or Broetry instead of poetry, and Broga. It's just yoga, guys. Mental health is something that we're incredibly passionate about, and not only in the sense of we've found a way to do something about it and to use our skills in digital creativity, but we're aware that it's an issue for organisations. And I spoke at Amazing Construction's inaugural conference 2 years ago, and this was an issue that they talked about, that the drain on the economy is $6 trillion. And it's no wonder that organisations like Cbus sponsor Amazing Construction, do the work that they do. But at the end of the day, one thing that we always come back to is that it's a human problem. And there are still those 6 men that will kill themselves today. And that will happen again tomorrow and the day after that. And through technology, we are trying to change that. And if that has helped in any way for anybody thinking about a project or an idea, an app, a solution that you might have, very welcome. Any questions I can help with, we'd love to talk about this. I can help with this all day, and Godfrey's given me the nod to shut up. But other than that, thank you again for listening, and enjoy the conference. Ta.